Will history remember this as the day the planet started to rein in big tech? Australia firing the first shot by banning under-16s from platforms and social media that include giants such as Instagram, YouTube, TikTok. We'll, of course, ask if rebellious teens will probably make light work of that ban. More broadly, though, is this the day regulators start treating merchants of scrolling the way they do tobacco and drinks giants, like businesses with a penchant for encouraging addiction? In tech, profits can be measured in data, often our personal data, and traffic. The longer users stay engaged, the more can be billed to advertisers. Any advertisers, even scammers, it seems. A report back in June by Reuters found that the parent company of Instagram, Facebook, and WhatsApp made a whopping 10% of its revenue from scammers in 2024. Scammers that sometimes use forced labor to cultivate potential victims. We'll ask about the will to crack down on cybercrime and, more broadly, to regulate a views at all costs business model, especially when big tech's so beholden to American billionaire tech bros, who certainly have a friend in Washington these days, it seems. Today in the France 24 debate, how to rein in social media platforms and the addiction economy that makes them rich. With us from Puerto Rico's capital, San Juan, she became a household name when she blew the whistle on the practices of her then employer, Facebook. Data scientist and social media accountability advocate Frances Haugen, thank you so much for joining us here on France 24.
Thank you for inviting me. Happy to be here.
From Brussels, Social Democratic member of the European Parliament. From Denmark, Christel Schadelmose, thank you for joining us. Yeah, I know that your country's considering following Australia's suit. We'll talk about that in a moment. His remit is common norms and standards when it comes to tech and even space. Jérôme Barbier, former head of cybersecurity and out-of-space initiatives for the Paris Peace Forum. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too.
And you know his face, Peter O'Brien, host of our Tech 24 program. How are you?
Very well, Francois. And yourself?
I'm okay. By the way, you can always listen, like, and subscribe to the France 24 debate wherever podcasts are streamed. Let's begin with this whole scam thing. You call them scam centers, scam farms, places like KK Park, that's on the Myanmar side of the border with Thailand, which the junta there claims to have liberated back in October. Thousands there with their passports confiscated by criminal groups and forced to work 17 hours a day coming up with phony schemes or luring the unsuspected over the internet. It's not just Myanmar, by the way. According to The Guardian, scam farms are big business throughout Southeast Asia. But scam centers also operate on a smaller scale here in Europe and elsewhere. Yeah, the statistic there for Laos, you were telling us, was particularly stark. 69% of GDP would be what is made up by these scams, and they pay. They pay platforms like Meta to push their suspicious content, including ads that steal the logos and sites of real brands, like our news outlet. The Reuters news agency reporting that internal memos talk about huge revenues estimated from unscrupulous sources. Meta, which pushed back a little bit, stating that, well, perhaps the numbers that we're talking about present a selective view that distorts our approach to frauds and scam. They say that it's rough and overly inclusive, this number of 10.1% of 2024 revenue, Peter O'Brien, that comes from scams. Still, it's shocking.
Yeah, I think it's worth just separating the different kinds of scams that we see from different parts of the world. Certainly this huge influx of scams now coming from Southeast Asia, you were mentioning there, from the so-called Golden Triangle Zone. They are primarily, according to reports, pig butchering scams. So those are trying to identify vulnerable individual victims and getting at them any way they can, eventually building trust over the course of months or even years before going in for the kill and extracting, in a lot of cases, over half of these people's bank accounts. The kind of ads that we're seeing, fraudulent ads that we're seeing across, for instance, Meta's platforms, they're more typically associated with South Asia. These kind of scam adverts that appear on the site and encourage people to buy into fraudulent crypto schemes, for instance. That's also still a huge problem. And those were more the kinds of traditional scams that were featured in that Reuters report. But now we're seeing an even bigger economy defining the economy of Southeast Asia based around these pig butchering schemes.
So we, by the way, Francis Haugen, reached out to your former employer. They did not get back to us for joining this conversation. I just want to point that out. We're talking about this in the same breath that we're talking about this bid to regulate teenagers, because it's the question of, is it profit at all costs, really, when it comes to these giants of tech?
What we've seen repeatedly is that Meta particularly will not take action unless they feel pressure. So a lot of their features that they're bragging about right now in terms of safety for kids, those were rushed out onto the stage last fall when Australia began talking about the possibility that they would ban access for under 16s. We have to start having conversations about what kind of pressure would need to be applied in order for them to take things like scam ads seriously, given that Meta themselves admits that somewhere on the order of 10% of their revenue from advertising is coming from ads that the average person would say, that's really shady.
And it's, by the way, it does seem to work sometimes, bad publicity. Last week, the Cambodian National Bank announced it had shut down the Huion Group, an established payment service provider, which was suspected of laundering billions of dollars from criminal networks. And now, following a report by the French news agency AFP on scam centers in Myanmar, Elon Musk's Starlink has taken to heart red flags thrown up in the United States, it should be said, by Congress and the Treasury, and shut transmission for many of those scammers. There you see how much internet traffic is going through there. Christelle Schadelmoser, pressure works. Is that your experience?
Definitely, but not just pressure, also regulation. We need to have clear rules to guide this. And in the European Digital Services Act, I was the Parliament's chief negotiator on that. We're saying that if it's illegal and the platforms are notified, they have to take action. But the question is that enough? Maybe we need to make the platforms really liable for what takes place on the platforms. Maybe that's the only way to really get to stop this scam. I mean, one thing is the factories, but in Denmark, we have seen several examples of, well-known television personalities being misused as well. And even when we notify Meta, they are not taking actions. So, and they are, in fact, obliged to do so under the DSA. So maybe we need to regulate even further.
When you say make them liable, are you suggesting treat them as publishers or broadcasters like we are as a television channel?
Well, that could be one of the ways to tackle this, but today they are in fact exempted from liability on what is posted on their platforms, or at least there is a conditional exemption. But maybe we should make them real liable, like classical media, but at least we need to do more than we're doing today, in my opinion, because we have not really tackled all these issues yet, and the platforms, they don't really act as if they take us seriously, and that's a huge problem.
Jérôme Barbier, there is not a blanket regulation, a framework yet that's being talked about at the EU level?
Well, there is a DSA in place, as MEP Schadelmoser reminded, and the question we have with
the Digital Services Act.
Yes, exactly. It was voted recently, and that enabled the European Union, in case of severe violation, to put a fine up to 10% of the global revenue.
How's that going? It's been, what, nearly 2 years since?
It's going actually well, but the question that such events prove us is, like, for instance, if the Reuters numbers are true and that Meta makes 10% of its global revenue from violation of the DSA, from a rational economic standpoint, they may have interest of paying the fine, because if they earn more while violating the law, so maybe we need to reform either the threshold for the fine. And there's also another thing, is that the DSA, Digital Services Act, is an economic regulation. You mentioned the situation in Southeast Asia, in Cambodia, in Laos, with those scam farms. There may be something also to explore about criminal liability. If a company is directly, and it's in economic system, empowering severe violation of human rights, as it is the case in those scam farms, there may be a way, and there are precedents in other areas of the economy, to make them liable for that.
So this is interesting. Frances Haugen, you heard first Christelle Schadelmoser talk about liability. Then you heard Jérôme Barbier talk about criminal liability. Does it seem realistic when you're coming up against these giants?
The first step in order to get places like the United States to take these issues as serious as they should is to set norms around the world. We can look at things like the Australian law and ask, like, is it going to be effective? It's important, no matter what, even symbolically, for countries to start saying we are facing serious consequences and we refuse to accept them. And so I don't think it's impossible. And there's always a thing where, one day the consequences become great enough that people don't tolerate them anymore. And I think we're starting to live with that moment of transition when it comes to kids. And I can imagine scam ads being the next frontier for that as well.
Yeah, so that brings us to today's news. The hashtag #SeeYouWhenI'm16 was spotted on social media down under. On day one of the ban, some youngsters defiant, others fatalistic, while the center-left government pointing to research that indicates how young teens suffer mental health issues from overexposure to screens and misinformation, bullying, harmful depiction of images. Let's listen to how the Australian Prime Minister himself spun this move.
Learn a new instrument or read that book that has been sitting there on your shelf for some time. And importantly, spend quality time with your friends and your family, face to face. Have a great summer.
Peter O'Brien, are those under 16s going to have a great summer?
I think they might well do, especially if they continue on some of the platforms that have not been banned. What do a lot of young people do nowadays? They game. And I think this is a really overlooked part of any of these discussions around these kind of regulations, not just in Australia, but in the EU as well. Among the platforms not coming under this ban, Discord, Roblox, Steam, Lego Play. Just recently, Europol was warning that it was via gaming chat rooms that young people, children, were being recruited to commit crimes, some of them very violent crimes. So I just think if we take that, as well as the fact that new platforms or niche platforms are cropping up in response to this law coming into effect, before we even start to talk about how easy it is to circumvent these laws, the nature of the internet as it stands is there are always alternatives to go to, and some of them are not falling under this ban whatsoever.
So, Christelle Schadelmoser, would you agree with Peter that what Australia has proposed is insufficient?
Well, I'm not sure. I really like the Australian ban. And we in EU are looking at Australia right now. We will look at how it works, how many young people will bypass it, how do they designate platforms, etc. So in many ways, I think we will to learn from them. In the European Parliament, we have just adopted a resolution, a report, where we call for an age limit, 16 years, and control of that age limit for social media. And we believe that it is important to do something. We do that as well for kids and minors when they are in the offline. And I think it is important to try to do something here.
And would you include gaming sites in your ban?
Well, in the same report, we are talking about a need for regulating the video games as well. Maybe in another way, maybe more soft, maybe stronger. I don't know yet what but we do believe that we need to regulate, and we need also to have a level playing field. So it's not just social media platforms, but also other types of online services that can harm our kids that we need to do something about.
All right. Well, in any case, let she or he who didn't use a fake ID to get into a bar when they were underage cast the first stone. Still, it's going to be tough for 15-year-old Taiwo Marchand to navigate his 55,000 followers on YouTube before he next blows out his birthday candles. Marchand is not a gamer. He's a musician. We can perhaps show images of him playing his piano there and singing Fly Me to the Moon in English, French, Japanese, and Portuguese. There you hear it. Now, to get ahead of the censors, he's kind of gone old school. He's launched a newsletter so you can register and keep on top of things for him. Frances Haugen, a couple of interesting points here. One that was pointed out by one of our guests earlier, which is how these social medias have become broadcast medias. They're not so much anymore about talking to your friends. They're more for consuming or producing content for a public audience.
Well, you mentioned there YouTube. You didn't mention Instagram. You didn't mention Snapchat, which I would say are places that people spend much more of their social energy when they are in that age range. But I think one of the really interesting things that's going to emerge from people trying to, go around the ban is we've kind of accepted a monopoly when it comes to social media for at least 10 years. Having a diversity of social platforms suddenly get users. It's not just a question of, quote, whack-a-mole. It's a question of we get to experience different ways social media might exist. And I think that's going to be really fascinating because there are a lot of pro-social social media sites out there. You probably just haven't heard of them before. And so it's going to be interesting to see how interaction changes. Is it the same number of minutes? Do kids have less trouble falling asleep at night because they're designed in ways that contemplated the problems of Instagram? I think it's going to be a very exciting period over the next year.
Yeah, how do you make it so that the kids can go to sleep earlier? What would be the practical way of doing it, Frances Haugen?
Well, I think there's some really simple things, like things that Facebook tried themselves. They asked kids, do you want us to stop sending you notifications late at night? And it turns out when you don't send kids notifications, they spend less time on platforms late at night. But Facebook chose to roll that back because they also use it less. But it can be things like slowing the app down late at night. Even a tiny bit of delay, less than you would even notice if I asked you, like, is this slow? Even a small amount of delay between pieces of content, making the feed almost feel like it's heavier, that can make people use these platforms less. And when we start thinking creatively and listening to users' requests, like saying, I don't want to be binge consuming late at night, we end up getting more creative solutions.
And this brings us into the realm of what is human nature. Is it better to have A, the user decide that, B, to have the platform that's feeding the content decide on slowing it down as you describe it, Frances, or C, the government?
Well, I think the question right now is we've seen from Facebook's own documents and the lawsuits that are being levied in the United States, because remember, we sue people in the U.S. We're not as good at passing comprehensive, oversight laws. In the lawsuits that are being unfurled right now, we're getting more and more and more public disclosure as the court cases progress. That Facebook tried lots of things to make people have a less addictive relationship with these platforms, and they chose not to use the solutions they found, because in a world without regulations that say you must consider the costs, not just the economic benefits to you of your features, we're going to see a very simple decision every time. You're going to always say, oh, I guess we're not going to ship that feature that gave more control to users that might have helped them regulate their own usage, because that's where the money is.
By the way, this ban in Australia, there was one campaigner, this woman by the name of Mia Bannister, her 15-year-old son, Ali, committed suicide. And she blamed the stuff that happened on social media to him. I know there are cases here in France, similar ones, Jérôme Barbier. Again, do you agree with Frances that you have to make it punitive? How do you go about this? How do you make it so that young people are less addictive?
Well, actually, I agree, and often we raise this question of big platform regulation as like tech regulation, something old-fashioned like in the 2000s. What we are talking about nowadays is a systemic harm made to a whole generation, and there are a lot of studies by psychologists, by sociologists also, that prove that there is cognitive effect on an entire generation. So from a regulatory perspective, it's a public order debate. This is also why the state is legitimate in forbidding it, and putting something much more stringent than just fines.
A public order debate, explain.
A public order debate in the sense that the harm done to the population, to the child, the risk of suicide, the alteration of social link, the alteration of the political perception, the alteration of, conceiving facts. If you are making a very basic study about how child or teenagers at the moment know, for instance, there is less digital literacy in the Gen Z, so the new generation, than in the millennials that I'm from, which is absurd, supposedly.
Why?
Because those platforms are making money in raising contents that blurry the line between normal interactions and simulated interactions, between reality and AI content, for instance, generated content and fiction. And they are living in that. Their entire social interactions are going through Facebook, are going through Instagram, are going through platforms. They are sort of disconnected from the world. So measures, unfortunately, taken by the state. I agree from an economic liberal perspective, you would hope that you may find self-regulation. We tried. We tried for 10 years to have agreements, to have framework of good behavior, to have non-binding agreements with the platforms. As Ms. Organ said and published as a whistleblower on her own, they are not actually implementing those guidelines. So at the moment, we need to take action. And on your previous question about will it work, just a very short mention, but the Australian example is good because there is often this idea that we cannot impose on those very big companies stronger than state any law. The Australian state, that has not the economic weight of Europe as a whole, for instance, decided it. Meta is suppressing the accounts. There is no symmetry between a state and a company. If we command them to stop, they need to do it. So maybe we just need to show the muscle.
If Australia can do it, Christel Schadelmoser, can Denmark do it?
Well, I hope so, but I honestly believe that it's better to do it at European level so that we can harmonize the age limit and the age control mechanisms. And we also both try to use the Digital Services Act even more because of this public health reasons. But we might also have to add and be more concrete on what we will not accept in terms of harmful addictive design features, so that we also can stop that. When we ask in Denmark, young people, kids and young people, do you spend too much time on your telephone and on social media? They're saying yes, and they want to have help to stop that. So I simply think that we need to do it. And in Denmark, we are discussing, the government has decided to make the age of 15, the age when you can enter social media, 13 if you get parental consent. But Denmark is starting to do something. A lot of European countries are testing age control mechanisms right now. And I am looking forward to see if the European Commission will follow the advices and recommendations from the European Parliament to come up with a law that makes this harmonized at EU level so we really can start protecting all European kids. I believe in regulation.
I want to get back to this issue of regulation, but do you just want your reaction as well, Christel, to what Jérôme Barbier said, how this has to be sold as an issue of public safety? You said actually public order, this issue of regulation. Is that how you're selling it? What is the reason you're giving?
But that is, we're talking about public health and the risk for systemic risks for public health, that people are getting addicted to their phones and spend too much time on it and cannot focus, don't learn in the right manner, etc., etc. So we are experimenting with our kids right now because of how much time they spend on these addictive social media. So therefore, it is the arguments we have on the table right now. And that's also why I believe that we have to do more than we're doing today. However, the Digital Services Act already today offers us a lot of opportunities. Without that law, it would have been even more difficult to try to get rid of some of the worst features on social media.
We've seen Peter O'Brien. There's now this new regulation where if you want to go on pornographic sites here, you have to give proof of your age. Articles have shown how easy it is to get to skirt that rule. Still, is it a good idea to have a law even if you skirt it?
Well, I think Emmanuel Macron is definitely looking at the result of that law that was passed. He's also looking at the fact that in France, a ban on social media for children is a very popular proposal. Most French people do support it. And so I think there is an element we're forgetting here a little bit, which is the political element. And that's the fact that he does see, at least in France, as one of the few areas where he can still affect policymaking in this country and notch up a win, so to speak. I think that's also why he's pushing for such strict, he's pushing for a united European front on this and working with, for instance, Denmark on being one of those first countries to test out a protocol which will allow age verification. So he's crusading on this idea, and I think we need to add that element in. It also, if you look at the kind of more, so this is an interesting kind of bipartisan thing as well. You have different people on both sides of the right and left, both in the US and in Europe, kind of diverging on this. And in Europe, it's definitely something that has been raised every time there's been something like a protest movement or a extremist attack. Politicians have been very quick to blame social media. So I thought I'd just put that bit in there. Maybe Christelle can tell us how close Denmark and France are to pioneering that age verification app that we're still expecting today. I don't know.
An age verification app, Christelle Chalmos, how close are we?
Well, it is being tested right now, so we are quite close to that. We want to make sure that it works, that it is privacy preserving, because we don't want to send even further data away to the platforms. So I think we will very soon will see that the test works, and then it will be rolled out in more countries. But I mean, I think you're right about it. There is also a political aspect of this, but we politicians, we do listen to our citizens, our voters, and there is a huge call all over Europe for us to do something to protect kids from some of the very dangerous, illegal and harmful content that they are faced with when they are on social media. So we are also reacting to a call, and I think we have an obligation to react on it. And if it can make us more popular, that is a good effect as well.
What about in the United States, Frances Haugen?
You know, we are living in a very unique moment in the composition of our Congress, and we are struggling to must-pass legislation.
But is it popular?
So
Would such a move be popular?
Yeah. You know, it's fascinating that the tide has really turned in the last 2 years. So in the last 2 years, we've had the situation where you see more and more people who directly interact with kids having conversations saying maybe we should wait until the end of 8th grade, which would be 14, to give kids smartphones. I think pushing for a 16-year-old cutoff would be much more difficult, given that we do have a greater prioritization of freedom of speech in this country. But I think coming in there and saying, you know, right now, a third of 7 to 9-year-olds, so these are not 12-year-olds, these are 7 to 9-year-olds, a third of them are on social media. And so the question becomes, what are you willing to do to preserve some digital-free childhood? You know, we're not saying this is supposed to be, you know, never a screen in front of a kid, but, you know, should you have silent lunchrooms in middle schools because kids are all on their phones instead of actually talking to each other in person? So that's kind of where things stand in the US today.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out as well that obviously one of the big arguments that big tech has given over the years is that they're trying to equip parents to do more. That's kind of what they get at. And actually, if you look at what Australia's done, one effect, which you might call a halo effect if you're one of the wonks looking at this, is that this is getting parents, if the testimonies are anything to go by, because I'm not in Australia right now, but this is getting parents to really look at what their kids are doing and thinking, oh, are they actually trying to circumvent these things? What platforms are they using? So it has kind of started a discussion in a way that big tech never was able to, despite claiming to try and engage with parents.
Yeah, we had this announcement, Frances Haugen, from Instagram this Wednesday, saying that now you can maybe curate your own algorithm to a degree. Your reaction to that?
Facebook has an amazing history of promoting features that may or may not work. So as recently as September of this year, Arturo Bejar, who's probably the second most known Facebook whistleblower, went through and audited their kid protection features and found about 2/3 of them were not working as described. So I am deeply suspicious of any safety feature that Meta announces regarding kids, especially when they're announced in immediate vicinity to either the passage of laws or laws being threatened, because that's when they most need the marketing message more than the reality.
All right, so a halo effect, says Peter O'Brien, a snowball effect, perhaps, from Australia to Europe. Of course, there is a player that we have to mention, which is the United States. Donald Trump slamming the EU for imposing a 120 million euro fine on Elon Musk's X this week, but also bristling at attempts by individual U.S. states like California to regulate artificial intelligence. He vowed to issue an executive order barring all but the federal government to decide how to regulate AI. According to the Wall Street Journal, Trump's views on the matter just so happened to coincide with what was whispered in his ear last month at the White House by the chief executive of next generation chip maker NVIDIA, Jensen Huang. Wang said a flurry of state laws could cause the U.S. to lose the AI race. People familiar with the meeting said, echoing a message presented in the discussion from the White House AI czar David Sachs and senior White House policy advisor for AI, Sriram Krishnan, both with close ties to Silicon Valley. So, in other words, Jérôme Barbier, how much weight will Donald Trump put into resisting all that we're talking about?
Well, I think we'll put some, but the point is that Donald Trump is following the wind more than he's having a proper, well-thought policy. The security we may have from a more like a realistic approach to politics is that if you're going with MAGA Republicans, a significant number of them also have like a direct political interest in protecting children. Like the idea of protecting children is something very strong in the American debate, has been weaponized by the most extremist Republicans against the Democrats. So if you manage to phrase a campaign around that, is going to be strong. And then, I mean, for instance, when I say following the wind, the point you made on AI, there was also a very domestic reaction to Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, being able to pass regulation on AI. And as there is no federal law, there is a law in the Silicon Valley. So basically, California put a democratic regulation on AI for the whole country. And this is also why he's reacting. I'm not sure he has a proper, well-thought policy on AI, at least from what I read from the White House so far.
So, Crystal Schadelmoser, you know, when you're in Europe, you're trying to regulate AI, you're trying to rein in big tech, but of course, at the Commission level and at the European Council level, they're also thinking about other issues. They're thinking about how you handle the United States when it comes to Ukraine, how it comes to their designs on Greenland, which you know something about. So it's also thinking about different things. So how much can the European Union at this point in time push back against the United States if Donald Trump decides to throw his full weight behind Silicon Valley?
Well, that's a really, really good question. Until Friday, when we saw the fine on X, I had my doubts on whether the European Commission were willing to push back and make sure that also American companies would have to comply with European tech regulation. But then we saw the fine on X, and that made me a little bit more relaxed. But it is difficult. We are very dependent on American technology, and we are very dependent on American military help for our own security, but also for Ukraine. And therefore, there is no doubt that it plays some role. And I think that the European Commission are trying to balance on all these difficult questions. But at the same time, it also has led to a huge debate at EU level on how can we in the future become more independent from the United States, both in terms of military, but also in terms of technological sovereignty. And I think it's important for us to not just talk, but also start acting on it. It will probably last some years before we are there, but it's good that we have the debate because as it is right now, we are under pressure. And if Trump gets really mad at EU, it will have a huge impact also on our economy.
Jérôme Barbier, The question that's often leveled at Europeans is, yeah, you're always trying to regulate. How come you don't make your own social platforms that are any good?
This is the usual debate we have with the Americans, and significantly when there is a fine on a big US company, especially when the CEO is a friend of the president. But the point is that over the X fine that was imposed earlier this week that MEP Schaldemose mentioned, the fact is that reportedly, I will phrase it like that, but in the debate there was at the council level, the Commission was very reserved in placing the fine because they were afraid of the Trump reaction. And it was because of the activity of some member states saying like, no, we need to have one because we need to make it clear that we regulate our continent by ourselves. So this is a very strong signal because we know that member states said we need to fine them. We are not going to comply with like American demand when it comes to the big tech. And when it comes to the actual power of Europe against the US, when it comes to a possible economic war, for instance, there was also several news outlets actually today reminding some of the actual levels that we have. Not to get too technical on that, but 40% of the dollar mass in the world is owned by EU member states. If we were to sell 20% of it, the dollar would collapse. So the point is that Europe actually also can threaten the US if we are going to power politics. And no one has interest in that. So you have a lot of discourse. On the actual reaction of the United States, I am not sure they're going to do anything. Elon Musk is not going to be happy, but yeah, he's going to pay.
I don't think this news that Trump wants to take control of AI regulation as a totality in the US is something that Europe, I don't understand why they'd be looking at that and feeling threatened by it. If anything, it shows
that's
that
not
the US
right now a discussion here so
but
much.
it shows that the US is fragmented on AI and tech, which is we always forget in Europe. We think, because we're constantly told that we are the fragmented ones with difficult regulation and policy to get our grips with because we've got all these member states. The US is a federation of states as well, and they have lots of very diverse and conflicting rules, including on AI and tech. And this, for me, shows this. And by the way, he can't do it without Congress. Trump can't actually do this, from what I understand. Francis, feel free to tell me I'm wrong, but he can't do it without Congress.
I was going to say, this is a great actual illustration of, you guys forget that there's a lot of social media regulation in the United States at the state level. You know, other states in the United States, like Florida and I think Texas, have ruled before banning under 14-year-olds, for example, from the platforms. And you're 100% right that in terms of this question of who's more fragmented, the United States or Europe, you know, we pass very, very different laws from state to state on these issues like AI or what fragments of AI each state is most concerned on. And I think it's a fascinating question, what Trump is trying to bring up of like, you know, what will happen to the industry if there isn't unified action. But the flip side of that is, why doesn't his Congress pass it? You know, like he has control of the House, he has control over the Senate. He could have passed AI regulation at any point in the last year, and yet the Republican Party has not actually taken a step forward. And that legislation would have it would have been preempted all those state laws.
But if he issues,
it's a symbol of him being, you know, powerless right now. Yes.
If he issues an executive order and the Supreme Court backs him up, does he even need Congress?
Well, this is one of these interesting things about Trump's executive orders. He has a tendency to bring executive orders in spaces that he does not constitutionally have rights to rein in. And I think the great example of this is like where the tariffs are going right now. You know, we have tariffs in the United States, and yet he has been losing court cases regarding whether or not he had the right to unilaterally do that, or was that the domain of Congress. So we'll see how it goes. It will cause chaos. We are less predictable than we may claim to be when we talk to Europeans. But it's a symbol of what's going on in terms of our Congress's inability to pass laws right now.
Francis Haugen, we couldn't let you get away without asking you the question. Meta, when you worked there, it was called Facebook. It owns Instagram. It owns WhatsApp. Yeah. It owns Facebook. Is a breakup in the cards? Is that something that will ever happen?
If the question is, should it happen, 100% it should happen, because the reason we have all these systemic problems, be it the human trafficking, 17 strikes and you're out announcement earlier this week, to, you know, Facebook knew they were hurting kids and they did it anyhow because they had got slightly more usage. You know, all these things are a pattern of behavior that traces back to one person, which is Mark Zuckerberg, who is the CEO. And at a minimum, a breakup would mean you now have 3 or 4 CEOs that could make separate decisions and have different kinds of relationships with the public and their users. Will it happen? I think one of the things that's hard for people to appreciate is how angry people are at these companies. Mark Zuckerberg is substantially less popular than Elon Musk, but Elon Musk is the one who we always say, like, oh, of tech CEOs, Elon has the worst PR. How bad does Mark's perception have to get to be at the public before, some politician is going to float the breakup just for the political win? So we'll see how that goes.
Christel Schadl-Moser, your thoughts on what should happen seen from a European perspective?
Well, in Europe, we really try to make sure that no one can act as if they have a kind of a monopoly. I'm not sure that this is the case right now. For Meta, we have several social media platforms, but we have made another law called the Digital Markets Act, which is exactly to create a better competition at the market. And I'm hopefully that it will be enforced in a strong manner. I don't know whether that will lead to the fact Meta is a gatekeeper. I'm not sure that would lead to the fact that it would be split up in EU. But we definitely have to keep an eye on it and use the tools we have in the toolbox to make sure that they're not misusing their huge power. And I do agree with Frances Haugen. I think that Europeans, to a very large extent, are fed up with the way the big tech giants are acting, and they want them to be regulated better and make sure that they are enforced in a proper manner. And that's not really the case right now.
Peter O'Brien, in February, there was this big tech summit that took place at the Grand Palais here in Paris. You were there for us. There's this mix, right? At the same time, these sort of Tony Stark characters from that are all household names, including now Sam Altman, who's the head of the parent company of ChatGPT. Yeah. They're treated with a lot of deference when they come here to Paris or to Europe.
They are, and you can understand it because AI is, as much as we want to talk about it being a bubble or not, is adding billions and billions and billions of dollars to the economy right now. So obviously, these world leaders see it as a geostrategic priority. We've moved on from the initial discourse around Rishi Sunak's sudden concern with safety to what Macron has now propelled us into, which is hang on a sec, everyone's got to get this. I've got to get this before someone else gets it. And we'll see what happens in India in the next summit, which could be that'll be the first time the AI summit is happening, outside of the Western sphere. So we'll have to see what the direction goes from that. But I think at the moment it's seen as a priority for national security. And as the security situation gets worse around the world, every country wants to be the one to control AI. So it's
quick final question, Jérôme Barbier. You heard Frances Haugen describe how, a lot of these regulations or these changes or these guidelines, they don't work. Out of Australia, will today be remembered as an important day? What happened in Australia, or will this not work?
I think it's an important day. I don't think it will work because, as it was mentioned, I think the law is also a bit flawed in the way it's written, and because it let a lot of things aside. You mentioned gaming applications, there's also dating applications. That is a bit more worrying. But it's a good sign. It's a good sign because it shows that it's not just the EU wanting to regulate, as it is often accused of, but that all states are considering that there is an issue and that we may find at some point a way through that was, for instance, proposed by Japan during the G20 2019, which was to have an alliance of democracies regulating on common standards their own digital market, which would be actually a way through, even if the United States are not part of it. But if you can already agree on baselines and ambitious baselines for content governance, for protecting children online between Japan, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, the EU, and every democratic state that wants to join, it will already have an impact, and including an extraterritorial impact. Because if you close this common market to the giant American companies in the Silicon Valley, they will comply at the end of the day. Because this is an economy that is made on the people. So the market has the more people will win.
All right, Jérôme Barbier, we'll have to leave it there, unfortunately. I want to thank you and thank as well Peter O'Brien, Frances Haugen for being with us from San Juan, Christel Schadl-Moser in Brussels. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.